Welcome to the inaugural Lady Marilyn Floissac Memorial Lecture. I would like to extend an extra special and warm welcome to Lady Floissac's family, who are here with us this evening. Welcome. We are very grateful that you have allowed the university to honor her memory in this way by instituting a special lecture series in her name. Thank you for that. As you know, the Open Campus St. Lucia site held the inaugural Patricia Charles Memorial Lecture in 2011, and we have since had 5 very interesting lectures in this series. But we would not have been able to do this without a very important partner. Throughout the years, we have had the loyal and devoted sponsorship and support of the First National Bank, thus securing the sustainability of such an important public education venture. Tonight, the First National Bank joins us again as we launch another annual lecture series, and we would like to thank the bank for its unflagging interest in supporting the Open Campus in its mission of national development through engagement in quality discourse. Can I have a round of applause for our partner? And I'm sure Mr. Robert Favre is somewhere. Yes, he's so much a fixture at the site, I almost didn't notice him in the crowd. This new lecture series was initiated in honor of another former resident tutor of the University of the West Indies, Lady Marilyn Floissac, who headed the School of Continuing Studies in St. Lucia from 1982 to 1993. She presided over what was then known as the Challenge Examination Program. The program was developed by the UWI to enable Caribbean students in the non-residential campuses across the region to access higher education in their home countries through what was then brand new technology of distance education being pioneered by the regional university. Those 11 years during which Lady Floissac managed the university's outreach at this site were 11 very productive years in the history of education in St. Lucia. Many St. Lucians used this program as a stepping stone to achieving degrees which they may not have been able to do otherwise. She also undertook the physical development of the local site, beginning the transformation that led to the establishment of what must have been the first teleconferencing facility in St. Lucia, and adding classrooms to support the increasing number of learners. Therefore, Lady Floissac moved tertiary education several leaps forward in preparation for the 21st century. She served the university at a time when it was transitioning into new modalities of teaching and learning, and firmly establishing itself as a world leader, especially in the fields of tropical medicine and agricultural research. This she did in her inimitable style, without fanfare, and with her signature approach, unruffled but firm and resolute. Those members of staff who worked as her support team and are still with us remember Lady Floissac as strict in terms of ensuring that they achieved and maintained a high standard of work, but also as caring and flexible in her interpersonal relations. They note that she was especially concerned about the health and welfare of staff and students, and was quick to observe and even correctly diagnose non-obvious ailments. I'm not sure if the doctors among us approve of this, but she did. She encouraged healthy eating and facilitated the start of what continues to be a thriving vegetable garden at the back of the site, managed by our groundsman. And our former groundsman was always very proud to say that Lady Floissac gave him his own bathroom. So in a sense, even as an administrator, she continued to draw on her academic knowledge and instinctive orientation to the world of science. However, her world was a balanced one, and it embraced the practical, the expressive, and the abstract equally. Cicero, Roman author and orator, declared, and I quote, "Art is born of the observation and investigation of nature," end quote. Perhaps this is why Lady Floissac was able to marry the worlds of art and science so effortlessly by developing her appreciation for the fine arts alongside the practice of science. While I never had the opportunity to work with Lady Floissac, I did have the privilege of being taught biology by her at the St. Joseph's Convent. And I can tell you that anyone who could have made Veronica Simon love and excel at a science subject had to have been rather special. Biology actually became my favorite subject after literature and history, of course, and I have never stopped being fascinated by the mechanics of living things. So I must thank Lady Floissac for introducing me to the wonders of nature. But ladies and gentlemen, before we get into the meat of tonight's matter, I would just like to call on Ms. Heather Floissac, daughter of Lady Floissac, to deliver some remarks on behalf of the family.
A few weeks ago, I received a call from Dr. Veronica Simon informing my sister and myself that the management of the University of the West Indies Open Campus St. Lucia wished to host a memorial lecture in honor of our mother. Brenda and I were both surprised and humbled by this gesture. We graciously consented to this offer by the university to pay tribute to our mother. As is well known, our mother was an educator for the major part of her life. Our mother was a teacher of biology and zoology, as expounded by Dr. Simon earlier, at St. Joseph's Convent for almost 22 years. Thus, when she retired from St. Joseph's Convent, it was almost fitting that she would apply for the post of resident tutor of the UE Open Campus for St. Lucia in 1982 to continue her career in the educational field. From 1982 to 1993, as resident tutor, her achievements have been well expounded earlier by Dr. Simon. Thank you for that. So, whatever job or work our mother undertook, she applied herself with passion and zeal. Our mother's philosophy in life was simple: reach for the stars and never give up. And no matter how difficult it is and how treacherous the path, never, never give up. Though having departed this earth, thanks to the UE Open Campus of St. Lucia, our mother's legacy lives on through these lecture series. Thank you.
I must confess that when I was first invited to give the lecture, got an email, I didn't really know exactly who Lady Marilyn Floissac was. But I can thank God for Google, that I quickly Googled the name to see exactly who this person was and realized, yes, I did know John and Hollis, knew John personally and knew Hollis Bristol. They were persons who I knew had made a distinguished contribution to St. Lucia. But I had never quite realized that they had a sister. And the more I reflected on that, the more I thought that my dad had failed me, because when he would tell the story of his life, he would mention the Bristol boys, but he never mentioned the Bristol girls. it turned out that there was a distant relative in common. My dad would always tell me, and late in his life, I would have him rehearse the story of his life, and he would tell me of Mr. William Inglace, who lived on Chaussee Road. And Mr. Inglace was the first cousin of his mother, who was a father figure to my dad because his father died before he was born, grew up without a father. And Mr. Inglace was one of those men who, his mother's cousin, who helped him in many ways. And he would say he was also the uncle of the mother of the Bristol boys. So he'd always mention the Bristol boys, but never mention the girl. So my dad passed away 2 years ago at the young age of 92, so I couldn't complain to him, but it was like, you didn't give me this relevant information. And as I studied, read about her on the internet, and talked to a few friends in St. Lucia who I knew, I was so impressed, because she has certainly left us a legacy of dedicated service that was committed to improving the life and the educational opportunities and the health of young people in this country. And we certainly owe her a great debt. As I reflected on her life, I certainly was reminded of those immortal words that lives of great men and women left behind us give us the opportunity to inspire us to also make our lives sublime, and departing, leave behind us footprints on the sands of time. And so I decided to dedicate my lecture tonight as to what we can do, following in her footsteps, to improve the opportunities for young people in St. Lucia now and in the future. So my lecture tonight, sharpening our vision for a well-educated and healthier society. Lessons from the science of early childhood development. The science of early childhood development is an area that I have begun to work in the last 5 years, and I think it has enormous implications and enormous guidance for how we can think of the challenges and opportunity we face as a small island state. So what can we do to improve education and health in St. Lucia for the future? First of all, we need to start early, and that's the theme of my lecture tonight. We need to start early. There's a large body of research on the biology of stress that clearly indicates that when individuals experience stress, there are physiological changes in our body that trigger what we know as the flight or fight response that helps us to deal with acute threat. That is an adaptive resource. It is something that's great. It prepares us to deal with emergency situations. But what the research indicates, that when stress is not acute, but it is excessive and chronic and prolonged, the activation of response systems, physiological response systems, that are very good for us on the short term, are not good for us when they are chronically elevated. And so we are documenting in research that there are changes in brain architecture, changes in immune functioning, changes in metabolic systems, changes in the secretion of stress hormones that are linked to the repeated and chronic activation of physiological systems. The research also clearly indicates that what are the active ingredients of early experience are the key relationships that children have with those in their social environment. Nurturing and responsive relationships help them to build healthy brain architecture and provide a strong foundation for learning, behavior, and health. But when protective relationships are not present, the elevated levels of stress hormones disrupt brain architecture and impair the growth of the brain cells and interferes with the formation of healthy neural circuits. Researchers today are talking about a phenomenon that they call toxic stress. Toxic stress or toxic stressors are examples would be living in chronic poverty, or being subject to physical or emotional abuse or chronic neglect, severe maternal depression, a caregiver who is chronically depressed, living in a family where there's substance abuse or family violence. What the research shows is those exposures literally disrupt brain architecture and alter stress management systems. So those infants are not only having a hard time dealing with the stressors in the environment right now, but they are impaired with dealing in stressors for the rest of their life. Early child development is crucial. The first few years are crucial. And we are finding that small disruptions can have a negative impact on brain development and the quality of the environment. In fact, there's now research from both human studies and animal studies that show that variations in the care provided by a mother to an infant can produce lasting changes in stress reactivity, anxiety, memory function, and the offspring. To give you a concrete example, I want to talk about, just show you the data in a minute of one study that did imaging of the brains of 12-year-old children. And they looked at children who had experienced either chronic poverty, experienced physical abuse, or had experienced neglect. And I'm going to show you in a minute the images of two areas of the brain, the amygdala and the hippocampus, two key structures involved in emotional processing and memory. And I will show you that abuse, neglect, and poverty were literally associated with structural changes in the brain linked to those early exposures. So here, for example, you probably can't quite see it with the lighting, but you can see this differences here. Here is a control group. These are healthy, middle-class individuals who had no negative exposures in their life. Here are, and you can see the size of the volume of the left amygdala. And here you can see the kids who had early neglect. You can see it's much smaller. The kids who had lived abuse. A similar pattern is evident for the left hippocampus, the difference with the control group, and here are the groups with early neglect, chronic poverty, physical abuse. The right hippocampus, here is the control group, much smaller brain sizes for those who had experienced those other conditions. Basically, what we now know is exposure to early childhood adversity, or it's often called adverse childhood events, ACE, has long-term negative effects on health. And this chart shows the adverse childhood experiences leading to disrupted neurodevelopment, to social, emotional, cognitive impairment, to adoption of health risk behaviors, to disease and disability, social problems, and ultimately to early death. And on the left-hand side are examples of what are called these adverse childhood experiences. I want to give you a sense of the scientific evidence of how devastating and how long-term the negative effects are of these early childhood experiences by focusing on one US-based study that was based on 17,000 members of the Kaiser Permanente health plan. These were adults. They were interviewed as adults about those 10 experiences that we just saw, if they had experienced any of them while they were growing up. One of the things that this study found was that adverse childhood experiences are quite common. 27% had experienced substance abuse, 23% parental separation or divorce, 17% the mental illness of a caregiver, 13% a mother who was a victim of domestic violence, 6% someone in their family, parent who had been incarcerated, 11% psychological abuse, 28% physical abuse, 21% sexual abuse, 15% emotional neglect, 10% physical neglect. One of the interesting things that the study also found is that these adverse childhood experiences rarely occur in isolation. If you have one, the probability of having more than one is quite high. So they often are clustered in the same people in particular places. Why this is so important is because there is remarkable evidence of the negative effects of health in adulthood linked to these adverse childhood experiences. Here is one example of research showing the relationship between meeting criteria for major depression as an adult linked to the number of experiences of adverse childhood experiences someone had. So basically, this is odds ratios. So someone who had 5 or more experiences have a 5 times greater risk of being depressed as an adult. It's not just depression. I just picked a few examples. It's linked to a range of health outcomes, but to give you a sense of it, I wanted to pick a few examples. Here is the percent of persons with a particular health problem ever injected drug use. You could see the more experiences they had, the greater is the likelihood. 4% of those who had 4 or more experiences injected drug use. 4% of those who had 4 or more experiences had 50 or more sexual partners, so 6% in their lifetime. 18% of those who had 4 or more experiences ever had an STD at some point in their life. Give you another example, the relationship between those exposures and teen sexual behavior. Again, those who had 4 or more, 25% of them had sexual intercourse at a very young age. Those with 4 or more, 40% of them were pregnant as a teen. Those who had 4 or more, the males, over 30% of them fathered a child as a teen. So we have seen a broad risk of behavioral patterns linked to exposures to early childhood experiences. Here's another example. The risk of attempting suicide at some point in your life, and you can see the dramatic increase, 4 or more, 18% of persons with 4 or more had attempted suicide at some point in their life. Here's an example, even being something like the victim of a sexual assault is linked to adverse childhood experiences. Women who had 4 or more experiences, there's a mismatch of the colors here, but that's 5 or more experiences, 30% of those women had been a victim of a sexual assault at some point in their life. The pattern is similar for men. The prevalence is much lower. And it's not just these risk behaviors. It is a broad range of health conditions. So here you can see the risk of early smoking, starting to smoke at a very young age, associated with adverse childhood experiences, the risk of current smokers, much more likely among those who had many of those experiences, the risk of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, much more common among those with multiple experiences. And here, the #1 killer in the United States and in St. Lucia is heart disease. And you can see, I go back to odds ratios, a 3 times greater risk of having heart disease as an adult if you were experienced 7 or 8 of those exposures as a child. I hope I've convinced you that experiencing adverse childhood experiences has profound impact for health of adults. Just to give you examples of the scientific evidence that's emerging, I'm showing you one of several studies that have recently come from Scandinavia. And they come from Scandinavia because Scandinavia has wonderful registries where they keep track of so many things. So it's easy for researchers to capture a lot about an individual's life in Scandinavian data. Here, this is a study that looks at the relationship between stress that not occurred as a child, but stress that occurred to your mother, even stress that occurred pre-conception, okay? And they define stress as the loss of a primary family member, the loss of a child, loss of a spouse, or loss of a parent from 6 months prior to conception or during pregnancy. What is the relationship between that exposure and infant mortality? And what they found, stress that was experienced pre-conception, that stress that was experienced by the mother 6 months before she got pregnant, predicted a 50% higher risk of her giving birth to a baby who would die before its first birthday. And they also found a relationship between prenatal stress in the 2nd trimester to preterm birth and being small for gestational age. There are lots of other studies of this kind from Denmark and Sweden that show a relationship between stress that was experienced during pregnancy and diabetes risk and cancer risk in adults. What we are finding is that our bodies keep a record of what we have been exposed to over a lifetime, even before we were born, and it has consequences. This is not just a US problem or a problem in developed countries, it's a global challenge. A paper in The Lancet a few years ago indicated there are 200 million children in the world, aged 0 to 5 years, who fail to reach their potential in terms of cognitive and socio-emotional development because of some of the exposures that I am talking about. This paper assures us that effective and mostly low-cost solutions exist. And if we could only apply these principles on a global scale, we could see dramatic impact in improving the health and preparation for education for children in hundreds of countries. To give you an example of work, this is a review paper in low and middle income countries, because I want to show it's not just a US data. This paper reviewed studies from multiple countries, including countries like Barbados, South Africa, and India, where they documented that children being raised by a mother who is depressed, the maternal depression affects the child-rearing behaviors of the mother. It reduces cognitive functioning in children. By the way, these are from double-blind randomized controlled trials or other trials using experimental evidence. So this is very high-quality scientific studies. Maternal depression in a caregiver increases behavior problems in children. Depressed mothers have also been shown to be less involved, less sensitive, more negative when interacting with their infants. So what can we do about the problems of addressing early adversity? I want to give you a couple examples of studies that show enormous impact. One of these is called the High Scope Peri-Preschool Study. It's a study in Michigan where they took poor black children living in a public housing project. What has given the study its clout? They randomly, by a flip of a coin, randomized some of those students to an early childhood intervention, and the others were randomized as a control group. They were put on a wait list and never got the program. What did the program involve? It involved preschool. They received daily classes and weekly home visits for 2 years. This is all before school. Fast forward with me 40 years later. So all this is a preschool intervention, okay? 40 years later, what's the difference between those who got the intervention and those who didn't? Those who got the intervention have higher levels of education. They have higher levels of employment, higher levels of income, higher levels of savings, higher level of home ownership. They were more likely to be married. They were less involved with the criminal justice system over their lifetime. They were less involved with the social service system over their lifetime. And for every dollar invested in that program, there is a $17 return to society for every dollar invested due to the lower cost of the criminal justice system, of the social service system, and the higher economic productivity of those kids. I'll give you another example. It's the Carolina Abecedarian Project. Again, poor children, most of them black, were randomized to an early childhood intervention. In this case, they went to this intervention from birth, 0 to 5. The intervention provided them a safe, nurturing environment where they got good nutrition and good quality pediatric care. At age 21, that's it. It's just an early childhood intervention. Then they're sent to school. At age 21, those who got the intervention compared to the control group, fewer symptoms of depression, lower marijuana use, more likely to exercise, greater vocational assets. By their mid-30s, they've now assessed the development of risks for cardiovascular disease. And those who got the intervention have lower levels of multiple risk factors for CVD and metabolic disease, with the effects being stronger for males. I picked out one specific example to illustrate it. Here is the systolic blood pressure in the mid-30s in the intervention group. This is the treatment group. It's 125 is their systolic blood pressure. In the control group, it's 143. So a huge difference in systolic blood pressure linked to what happened in those children's lives, 0 to 5. I'll give you another example of a program that's making a difference. It's a program in New Haven, Connecticut, and it's trying to address the problem of maternal depression. It's called MOMS, Mental Health Outreach for Mothers. It's a multi-neighborhood, community-driven partnership that is developing interventions to meet the mental health needs of single mothers who live in at-risk neighborhoods. One of the goals of this program is try to meet the mental health needs within the context of all the other needs those mothers have, because mental health is not their only challenge. They face multiple other challenges. And the program is premised on the notion that for low-income women to do well and raise their children and be successful, you have to address the mental health needs that will impede their ability to not only take care of their children, but to be a good, stable employee and to be a productive employee. One of the innovations of this program is using community mental health ambassadors. They took other women from the same communities and they trained them to be peers and to be supporters of the target women. They are basically following the kind of Maslow's hierarchy of need that says if individuals have physiological needs, safety and security needs, social needs, needs for esteem and respect, and needs for achieving your potential. And you, in order to get to these higher order needs, which we are always very interested in society, you've got to meet the lower order needs first. Because people aren't free to address the higher order needs if they're struggling with their day-to-day survival. And so what this program does is tries to address all the needs at every level of exposure, so to ultimately prepare those women to be successful. The Community Mental Health Ambassadors, CMHAs, I abbreviate here, administered questionnaires to the women, asked them about their sources of support, their goals, what are the challenges they face, what support services would they need, what would they like to be available for their family, and then they helped them to address some of the needs. And what they are arguing is that providing a basic necessity to these poor women like diapers for their kids plays a huge role in reducing the stress in their lives. Services made available to them are crucial, but where you make the services available is also important because they try to do them in places where they're not exposed to stigma, places like a supermarket. They also have the community ambassadors being crucial to ensure that the women remain with the program because they're helping to build a social network of support because many of these mothers feel isolated. They've done a number of innovative things in this program. They're creating a manual so that other programs could follow their model. They've developed an app for the phones that connects the new mothers with each other. They're using a motivational reward system that promotes healthy mother-infant interaction, social connectedness, community engagement, and other innovative things they're doing, trying to build social capital within the women, having classes that helps them cope with stress, provide them group-based CBT, that's a strategy to address their depression, certainly, preparing them for being ready for jobs, as well as coaching them via videos. These early experiences have enormous positive impact. And one of the things we are realizing is that as you think of what do these parents need and what do the kids need, there are programs that only address the needs of kids, and there are programs that think you have to address the needs of kids and the needs of parents together. In fact, one of the things I do with a colleague that I work with is the question we deal with is how can we improve the lives of children by improving the lives of their parents? Because if we can improve the lives of their parents, there will be ripple spillover effects. So we have to think of the capacity building initiatives for adults. We have to think of the parenting skills for adults. We also need to think of how we can help communities to be stronger. I want to give you another example of a very innovative program that is addressing these issues by Elizabeth Babcock. It's the Crittenton Women's Union program. It's a program based in the city where I live in Boston, Massachusetts. What she does, she takes very disadvantaged women and tries to transform them by what she calls mobility mentoring, which is mentoring these women to be economically successful and to be able to provide for their kids. To give an example, here is data on the first cohort of women she dealt with. 40% of these women had at least one mental health diagnosis. 40% of them had a history of trauma. 35% had some disability. 37% reported that when they turn to family for help or friends, they either don't have any social support network, or the people they're trying to reach for help becomes a drain on them. 50% of these families had at least one child with special needs. Many of the women she's helping are women coming from homeless shelters. But what she's able to do has this concept of building a bridge to self-sufficiency. And that bridge has pillars. One of the pillars is family stability. Another is well-being. Another is education and training. Another is financial management. Another is employment and career management. And she mentors these women along the lines of each of these pillars in the program, helping them to overcome the obstacles to being successful to make it on this bridge. This is from a talk she gave where she argued that poor families lurch between jobs that don't pay the rent, to subsidies that do but don't last, to homelessness and temporary shelters, to work with no child care, to job loss, to borrowing on credit, to not being able to get an apartment because they have credit card debt or have been evicted. What has she found so far? It's remarkable. Within 5 years, clients would attain, these are the goals for the client story. This is not what she's found so far. This is the goals. Within 5 years, the clients would attain jobs that would fully support their families without public subsidies. And for most families, she has a target salary of the median family income in the United States, which is about $50,000 per year per family. Clients would also have saved $10,000 within 5 years. Of that, $3,600 would come from their own savings, which is matched by $6,400 from the program. So it's a very ambitious program. Key aspects of this program is a mentor. It's helping clients set personal goals. It's cash incentives. As they make steps, they are financially rewarded. It's surrounding them with social networks and teaching them, no matter what happens, hang on to the bridge, teaching them perseverance and hanging in there to be successful. This is what she has found so far. 99% of her families coming out of homeless shelters had retained their stable new housing for more than a year. Working adults in her program, job readiness, housing, and education programs experienced an average of 85% increase in their wages as a result of being in her program. 100% of high-risk mothers in supported or transitional housing are on time with making their rent payments. 77% of the clients who have gone through her program and graduated from GED, which is a high school equivalency exam, 80% who have done her job readiness training program, and 100% supported housing residents were working or in school within 6 months of completing the program. So again, it's early, but she's finding remarkable success that taking some of the most disadvantaged individuals from society and surrounding them with a comprehensive program has a dramatic effect on the lives of the parents. And you say to me, you've given me lots of examples of what's happened in the United States. Would these strategies work in low and middle income countries? So I'm drawing on a review paper here that describes studies in 23 different countries, including countries like Jamaica and Barbados, where some of these studies have done, that find if you provide early childhood intervention programs, the cognitive, behavioral, health, and schooling benefits are evident in those kids. Not only do you see an immediate benefit, but the effects are sustained over time, and a key component of success is education or stimulation component to the intervention. There are a range of various interventions. So here is a slide that talks about which ones predict greater benefit. What we find is that duration matters. And the programs that have the biggest impact, a 3-month program is not as effective as one that lasts 1 to 3 years. So some length of duration is good. Timing is important. The earlier you start, the larger the benefits you see. Nutrition interventions are very helpful, but nutrition interventions have the smallest effect if all they do is provide nutrition. The kids need cognitive and an educational component. Cash transfer programs, a model of giving poor mothers additional income, is also helpful, but they're more effective if they're combined with that educational component. Again, the good news is there are multiple ways to deliver this. There are studies that have used a part-day preschool, some have used a full-day preschool, some have used a visiting program where someone visits the mother prenatally and early in life. So there's a range of options that can be used that show greater benefit. Just to give you one example of a program, I picked one from rural Vietnam, where there were kids, birth to 3, had gotten a nutrition intervention from 5 communities. Then they took 2 communities and added, ages 4 and 5, a preschool intervention. What did they do in the preschool intervention? They taught the teachers to better teach the kids. That's what's one thing. They then did one-day training for fathers and mothers separately in that culture. They did the fathers in one group and the mothers in a different group once a month on issues of childcare and development. They also established a small library in the community with books that parents could benefit from, and also encourage parents in their homes to establish a play corner where they would play some of the games that they had been taught that foster cognitive development for the kids. What they found is that at ages 6 to 8, in those communities that had received the early childhood development, the children performed better academically, much higher scores on cognitive tests, and the effect was strongest among the most vulnerable kids, those who were stunted at baseline. There's also a lesson I want us to learn from a program in rural Bangladesh. It was a program that focused on parenting, and they took these poor mothers, they attended 16 parenting classes, and they tested, they had an intervention group and a control group, and they found, guess what? The mothers had learned a lot of facts and information about parenting. However, the mothers did not react differently, interact differently with their children. What was the problem? The evaluating team observed the mothers and documented that although 5 specific practices of child rearing were taught, only 1 was demonstrated, and even that one rarely with any material props. So they weren't making it real for the mothers. So one of the important take-home lessons is, if a program is to be successful, it has to go beyond merely giving information. The mothers need to be involved, parents need to be involved in rehearsing and learning, in identifying problem-solving skills, in practice and peer support, so they literally are learning the skills that they need to use. What matters in terms of parenting training? 3 things. Cognitive stimulation, caregiver sensitivity, that means serve and respond is a strategy of being sensitive and responsive to the child, and caregiver affect, a parent who is warm in terms of their response to the child and not being very actively rejecting the child. There have been randomized interventions of parenting in countries like China, Brazil, South Africa, Jamaica, Turkey, Vietnam, Chile, and Colombia and India that find if you improve these parenting skills along the lines I've just talked about, you find higher cognitive functioning in young children who receive these kinds of intervention. Cognitive stimulation increases the child task orientation, their social behavior, their self-confidence, their positive affect. Maternal sensitivity leads to more secure infant attachment. Maternal responsivity leads to higher infant cognitive ability and reduced behavioral problems when the children go to preschool. So again, enormous benefits linked to these interventions. And you say, what if we don't do anything about this? What if we just leave the status quo in place? There are costs for our nation, there are costs for the economy, and there are costs for the lives of those kids. Research shows that the kids who don't get these kinds of interventions, who need them, advance much less, don't go as far in school, and they suffer a deficit in annual income over their lifetime. Research suggests that as much as 20% lower annual income each year. Here is another slide from the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. The more adverse childhood experiences kids had, 4 or more, they are more likely to be absent from work 2 days a month. They are more likely to have problems with serious job performance. So it literally is affecting productivity of the society in the workforce. Why should governments invest? Why should the St. Lucia government invest? The evidence is clear. Early childhood is the most cost-effective period of a child's life because investments made at that point in time have ripple effects that they have the rest of their life to reap the benefits. There are strategic actions we need to take place. We need to raise awareness levels among parents and professionals. We need to implement interventions. We need to expand preschool education programs. It is estimated that if we can apply these principles on a global scale, we will see massive global benefit. There are lots of benefits to these programs. One of the things we need to do is to integrate early childhood education with other systems within society. And one of the barriers that if you think of what I've just talked about, you could see the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Social Welfare, all having some responsibility, and are they coordinating their outreach to work effectively to improve the benefits for all? Before I conclude, since I've talked a lot about early childhood development, the question I want to ask you is, well, what if we have missed the period of birth through 5 for some of the kids? Can we do anything? Is all lost? Is there any hope possible? I want to share with you 2 programs. All is not lost. The earlier you start, the greater the benefits. However, we are built with resilience, which means we have the capacity to adapt. Not everyone experiences these exposures, have negative effects. And 2 key components of resilience is having a stable and committed relationship with an adult in your life. Another one is giving kids the skills to deal and manage stress. Let me talk about 2 key programs that are making a huge difference. One is called Experience Corps. There's a version of it in Los Angeles called Gen X, Generation Exchange, because it's you'll see in a minute, it's about getting the older generation to get connected to the younger generation. What this program does, Experience Corps, is take retired individuals, older adults, and recruits them to make a long-term commitment to work with elementary school kids. They are assigned to schools as a team because they're trying to build a unit of support. So like 5 people who have got the training, 5 retired persons will be assigned to a school, 1 per classroom. They work under the teacher's direction, and they provide group assistance to the kids in terms of reading and math. They have to make a commitment to stay with that same classroom at least 10 hours a week. They receive a small stipend for this. And in the schools, the cities that are using this in the United States, school districts partially fund the program. What has the program discovered? It's a win-win. There are benefits for the children. The children who get the program, their academics is improved, and behavioral problems in the classroom are reduced. So it's a benefit for the school, it's a benefit for the students. What is also remarkable, they're finding that it's an enormous benefit for the retired persons who are working. 2 years later, those retired persons have fewer depressive symptoms, fewer functional limitations, improved cognitive functioning. In fact, they did a study giving them fMRI tests and found increases in brain activity in their left prefrontal and anterior cingulate cortex 6 months after they started volunteering for the program. So literally measurable changes in their brain capacity. They also have a larger circle of friends. I'm not sure how to turn this off here. They also have a larger circle of friends and feel more meaningfully engaged in the community. Amazing, remarkable benefits. Let me give you the second example. It's a good friend of mine, Grammy-nominated gospel musician, Wintley Phipps, born in Trinidad, raised in Montreal, works as a minister in the United States, spent time going into prisons singing. He's a gospel musician, has sung for every US president since Ronald Reagan. Spent time going into prisons singing with Chuck Colson. Chuck Colson was the ex-Watergate leader who went to prison for his crimes, came out of prison and started the largest prison ministry in the world. And Wintley Phipps went into prison and was struck by two things. One is 80%, 70 to 80% of all prison inmates in the United States are high school dropouts, didn't finish high school. So anyone who's struggling to finish high school is at risk for a life of crime. That's number one. But secondly, a statistics from criminologists, it's estimated that as much as 2/3 of the crime in the future will be committed by the children of current prisoners. I'm not sure the data for St. Lucia, but in the US it's estimated that almost 2/3 of the crime in the future will be committed by the children of current prisoners. So the question is, what can you do to break that cycle? So he has developed what he calls the US Dream Academy. It's an after-school program that spends 11 to 15 hours in after-school programs with these children, children of prisoners and children who are falling behind in school. Because if you're falling behind in school at grades 3 and 4, you are at risk of incarceration. And the program focuses on skills development, character development, and dream development with mentoring as a key component. Importantly, the point of this program is improving academic performance of young kids in school is a crime prevention strategy. It's one way to break the cycle and ensure that they go on to higher education and to a productive life. Let me wrap up by leaving you with 5 numbers that encapsulates the key things that I want you to remember from this talk. 700 per second, 18 months, 90 to 100%, 3 to 1 odds, and $4 to $9. And you're saying, what are you talking about? Research shows that babies from birth are developing 700 new neural connections per second. Early childhood is a period of rapid brain development, and I'm saying we want to protect that. Secondly, 18 months. By 18 months of age, we can see differences in the vocabulary of the children, whether they're coming from a poor family, a working class family, or college-educated family. You can see the gaps emerge as young as 18. The early years matter a lot. 90 to 100% chance of developmental delays in a child if they have 6 or 7 of those risk factors. So again, we need to protect those kids. 3 to 1 odds. The odds of heart disease after 7 or 8 of those experiences that I mentioned before is a 3 to 1 odds of heart disease. And 4 to 9 is the average returns for every dollar invested that has been found in studies of this kind. So it's cost effective, it's an investment, it will save the society money long term. It's not an expense, it's an investment. I leave you with a statement from Kennedy, which I think is a good way as we remember the person we are honoring tonight. Robert Kennedy said, each time a man stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lot of others or strikes out against injustice, he or she sends forth a tiny ripple of hope, and those ripples build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. I think in her life, Lady Marilyn Floissac was more than a ripple of hope. She was a river of hope in St. Lucia. And it's my prayer that each one of you here tonight will decide to be at least a tiny ripple of hope that will make a difference in improving life and health for young people in St. Lucia today and for the future. Thank you very much.
I also want to say thank you to our sponsors, First National Bank, St. Lucia Limited. When we first came up with the idea of doing having this lecture series to honor Lady Floissac, we spoke with the managing director, Mr. Andy Delmer, who instantly supported us and asked us to prepare an MOU between our two organizations. We are so sorry that he is out of Ireland and couldn't be here with us this evening, but we want to make sure that we give him very special thanks. And of course, to acknowledge and thank Mr. Robert Favrier, who is here with us tonight and who is always here to see the process through and to ensure that we have everything we need so that our projects can succeed. So thank you very much to you, Mr. Favrier. And of course, it would be remiss of me not to say a word of thanks to Ms. Heather Floissac and to her sister, Mrs. Brenda Floissac Fleming, for enthusiastically embracing our decision to establish this memorial lecture series in your mother's memory. We know that 1 year on, after your mom's passing, it must be a very emotional time for you, and therefore we really do thank you both for supporting our efforts and for the support from your entire family. And we look forward to doing this again next year.